What if you could improve your health just by laughing? Laughing on purpose, without any jokes. Well, that's the basic idea behind a practice called laughter yoga.
Can a structured program of just laughing lead to measurable health benefits? We're going to explore what the science has to say about its effects on both our minds and our bodies.
All right, first things first. Before we can get into the data and the results, let's make sure we're all on the same page. What exactly is laughter yoga, at least from a scientific point of view?
According to the research, it's a very specific exercise. It combines group laughter with yogic breathing techniques. That's also known as pranayama. It was actually developed back in 1995 by Dr. Madan Kataria, and the core idea is fascinating. Your body apparently can't tell the difference between fake and real laughter. So the idea is that when you start simulating laughter in a group, it often turns into the real thing.
And these sessions aren't just a free-for-all. They're actually pretty structured. A typical 40-minute class, as described in these studies, follows 4 main steps. It starts with some deep breathing, moves into warm-ups, then they bring in childlike games to kind of get everyone to loosen up, and it all builds up to 15 minutes of dedicated laughter exercises. The groups are led through specific, guided exercises to get the ball rolling. For example, there's gradual laughter, where you start with just a small smile and slowly build it up. Or there's even silent laughter, where you do all the physical movements of a big laugh, but without making any sound. The whole point is to make laughter happen on purpose, even if you're not feeling it initially.
So why are scientists taking this seriously? Well, as the studies point out, stress-related health problems are a massive, growing concern. And because of that, there's a real hunt for interventions that are effective, but also cheap and easy for people to access. Laughter yoga, well, it definitely fits that bill.
Okay, so let's get into our first study. This one wanted to answer a really specific question. Can just one laughter yoga session change how your body physically reacts in the moment when you're put under pressure? So here's how they set it all up. They brought in 35 healthy young adults and split them randomly into 3 different groups. The first group did a 30-minute laughter yoga session. The second group did 30 minutes of relaxation breathing. That was to see if it was just the deep breathing doing the work. And the third group was a control. They just sat quietly. Then, right after their session, all 3 groups were put through a pretty intense, standardized stress test.
This graphic really helps you see the flow of the experiment. First, they took everyone's baseline measurements. Then came the 30-minute session, laughter, breathing, or quiet time. And immediately after that, they were hit with something called the TSSTG. It's a test specifically designed to trigger a physical stress response. Think public speaking and doing tough mental math in front of an audience. Yeah, pretty stressful.
And this leads us to the big question, right? Did that half-hour simulated laughter actually do anything to change how their bodies coped with the stress that came right after?
And here are the results. This chart shows cortisol, which is our body's main stress hormone. Now, if you look at the top 2 lines, that's the breathing group and the control group, you see a big spike in cortisol during the stress test. That's totally normal. But then, look at that bottom line. That's the laughter yoga group. Their cortisol response was significantly blunted. Their bodies physically produced less stress hormone, even though they went through the exact same stressful experience.
But here's where it gets really, really interesting. The study found this major difference between the body and the mind. While that physical hormonal stress response went down in the laughter group, their psychological experience didn't really change. When they were asked how stressed they felt, there weren't any significant differences between the groups. So their bodies were less stressed, but they didn't necessarily feel less stressed.
So that disconnect is a really interesting puzzle, right? The body is calmer, but the mind isn't. So that naturally leads to the next question. What happens if you do this more often? Does that gap between the body and mind start to close with consistent practice? Well, for that, let's turn to a big systematic review from 2024.
This review decided to focus specifically on studies done with nurses and nursing students, and that's a really smart choice, because it's a group of people known to experience incredibly high levels of chronic stress and burnout. The idea was to look at all the studies of longer-term laughter yoga programs and see if any clear patterns showed up.
And just real quick, what is a systematic review? You can think of it as a study of studies. Instead of doing a new experiment, researchers use a really strict process to find, evaluate, and then combine the results from all the quality research on one specific topic. It gives us a much more reliable bird's-eye view of the evidence.
Okay, so this review pulled together 10 different studies. And when the researchers put all that data together, some very consistent themes started to pop up.
study after study found that laughter yoga was linked with lower reported stress and less burnout. A couple of the studies even measured cortisol, just like in that first experiment, and they also found that it went down. The overall pattern was pointing toward broad, positive effects.
And here's the really key difference. Remember how in that one-off lab study, the mind didn't seem to feel less stressed? Well, in these longer-term studies, it looks like it did. The evidence here suggests that with consistent practice, laughter yoga was linked to improvements in both the body, like with cortisol, and the mind, with people reporting less stress, anxiety, and burnout.
Now let's zoom in on one specific study. This is a 2024 randomized controlled trial. That's the gold standard, where people are randomly assigned to a group. And this one looked at burnout and hope in 8th grade students.
So here's the setup. The researchers took 60 8th graders and randomly split them into 2 groups. One group, the intervention group, participated in 6 laughter yoga sessions over a 3-week period. The other group, the control, didn't. To measure any effects, both groups were assessed using standard scales for school burnout and hope, both before and after the program.
So, what happened? Well, after those 3 weeks, the data showed a pretty clear difference between the groups.
Let's zero in on burnout first. The laughter yoga group had an average score of 17.27, while the control group's average was way up at 2290. The researchers found this difference to be statistically significant.
And when they looked at the hope scores, it was a similar story, just in the other direction. The laughter yoga group averaged 29.28, which was significantly higher than the control group's 22.28. So, for these particular students, the practice appeared to be connected to some real positive changes, less burnout and more hope.
But what about longer-term psychological changes? This study had a different design. It involved 220 elderly retirees. Half of them were put into an intervention group that did a laughter yoga program for 4 weeks. They had 8 sessions in total. The other half was the control group. They just went about their normal lives. The researchers measured everyone's self-reported feelings of happiness and hope right before the program started, and then again after it was all over. But after those 4 weeks, it's a different story. The control group's happiness didn't really budge, but the laughter yoga group reported a significant increase in their overall happiness. Just like with happiness, the group that did laughter yoga saw their hope scores go up significantly after the 4-week program. Meanwhile, the control group scores, they stayed flat.
The authors state that based on their findings, it looks like laughter yoga can be an effective way to significantly increase feelings of happiness and hope among older adults.
Okay, so we've seen a potential psychological benefit, but what about physical effects, measurable changes in the body? For that, we're going to switch gears, which involves a completely different group of people, adults with type 2 diabetes.
And the researchers here were asking a totally different question. They wanted to know if laughter yoga could actually improve glycemic control, which is just the scientific way of asking how well the body manages its blood sugar.
What you're looking at here is the study's flowchart. It's another one of those randomized controlled trials. Researchers took 42 adults with type 2 diabetes and split them into 2 groups. One group did laughter yoga, and the other, the control group, just continued with their usual care.
Now, this program was a bit longer. It ran for 12 weeks with 8 sessions in total. The main thing they were measuring was the change in hemoglobin A1C, or HbA1c. That's a key indicator of long-term blood sugar control. They also kept an eye on other things, like changes in positive mood and sleep duration.
So what did they find? Well, after 12 weeks, the laughter yoga group's HbA1c levels had dropped significantly more than the control groups. The average difference between the groups was a reduction of 0.31 percentage points, which suggests a real measurable improvement in their blood sugar management.
Now, to be clear, the researchers themselves are very upfront about the limitations here. Some of the studies had small groups of people, and that social bonding thing is a huge challenge for research. It's really hard to tell if the benefit is from the ha-ha-ha or just from being in a supportive, fun group. It makes it really tough to isolate the key ingredient. So, as is almost always the case in science, more research is needed.
And there's a big challenge. You can't really blind the participants. I mean, they obviously know they're doing laughter yoga. And finally, a lot of the psychological results depend on self-reports, which can, be subjective.
Okay, so we've looked at 2 very different studies, right? Let's take a step back and try to figure out what we can really conclude from this. The evidence really points towards an ability to lower self-reported stress and burnout. It might even decrease physical stress markers like cortisol.
We saw that it appears to increase feelings of hope in students. And it shows these early, promising signs of helping with glycemic control for people with type 2 diabetes.
So where does that leave us? What's the bottom line? Well, the science, as it stands today, points to laughter yoga as a potentially useful, very accessible, and low-cost tool. Its biggest, most clearly demonstrated strength seems to be in managing the physical side of stress, helping to dial down that hormonal fight-or-flight system.
So maybe the best way to think about it is this. The evidence doesn't paint laughter yoga as some magic bullet that will make you immune to feeling stressed. Instead, it suggests it could be a really practical way to help your body regulate its physical reaction to life's pressures. And over time, that could make a very real difference.